So, welcome to Chat Communications Happenings and Trends. Today we are speaking with Brian Jaffe about his new civic engagement platform, Voca Votes. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you. So Brian, just to start off, what is Voca Votes?
So Voca is a new civic engagement platform that tries to make reaching out to your own city council or city hall as easy as texting a friend. So the idea behind it is that most people actually have a better idea what's happening at the national level because there's so much national media now than they do maybe even in their own neighborhood or certainly in their own city. And yet local government actually has, in many regards, more influence on our day-to-day lives. It controls the streets we drive on and the schools our kids go to. And yet, in many cases, people feel even more disconnected with their local government than they do with the national government. And so what Voca is trying to do is use a technology solution to really bridge the gap. And the way it works is people sign up at voca.vote, and then they get one text message question each week. And that's about a local issue. So it might be, for instance, where to put in bike lanes is a big issue where I live. And so, it could be, should we put, bike lanes on this particular thoroughfare and take away street parking? And that's obviously an issue that some people have, a very strong opinion about. And also a lot of people didn't even know the city was thinking about doing that. And so you get asked a question via text message, and then you respond with a 1 to 5 rating. So 5 is, I love it, it's a great idea. 1 is, that's a horrible idea. And you can also leave a comment. And then all of those answers get collected and shared with city government. And they also get shared with the public. So sort of everyone becomes on the same page of, hey, it looks like 80% of people want these bike lanes. Or on the other case, 80% of people don't want these bike lanes. And right now there is no information like that in most cities across the country. So that's really the problem we're trying to solve.
So would you say that this kind of, well, how closely is this to like something like a petition?
Yeah, so that's a great question. A petition is usually citizens themselves needing to sort of come up with a proposed solution, and then gathering a bunch of people who share that desire for that specific solution, and then getting a lot of signatures and presenting that to some policymaking body or some elected official. And I think petitions are great, but let's face it. I mean, most people are busy day in, day out. They don't have the either the time or the expertise to really write policy. But for instance, you wouldn't want to see me pitch a baseball game, but I can still tell you what's a ball and what's a strike. So I think what Voca allows you to do is, take policies that are being put forth by sort of professional policymakers, but then citizens to give their own opinion on that. And I think, especially when it comes to local issues, a lot of which have to do with, land use and basic services like police and fire, and local taxation, things like that. Citizens have a pretty good idea what they want when asked sort of, do you like this, yes or no?
So why did you create this engagement platform in the first place?
Yeah, so the background of Voca is there's sort of two things. First off, I am a strong believer that government can actually bring out the best in us, not just the worst in us. This may be an unpopular viewpoint right now, but my entire life there's been this narrative that government can't do anything right. I mean, if you ask people whether they'd rather go to the dentist or go to the DMV, most people would choose the dentist. However, when we look at what has made this country so special, government has had a lot to do with it. And even, especially at the local level, we've built wonderful livable cities and great institutions and schools and court systems that we actually follow, unlike in other countries where you just sort of bribe someone under the table and that's how you get what you want. I mean, there's so many wonderful parts of government, but if we don't have a way to actively engage with it, then we sort of discount it. And so that was part of it, is sort of like, how can we make government feel more engaging and like we have ownership of it again. And then the second half was a very sort of personal experience I had. My wife and I were volunteering in 2016 before the general election campaign, and we were in Las Vegas, walking neighborhoods and trying to get out the vote. And I had this really profound experience going to a lot of the neighborhoods there, which was that no one from outside the neighborhood ever comes into those neighborhoods, except for very rarely someone like me comes in, sort of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and asks them to do a favor, like says, basically, I want you to go down to the elementary school and wait for 3 hours to vote for my candidate. And I just had a sense there was kind of a lot of hostility. And, after I had spent some time there, I didn't really blame people, because I thought, you've kind of completely lost faith in government. And so it's really weird that the first time anyone from outside representing an elected official or a would-be elected official comes in, they're asking you for a favor. That it should be the opposite way around. People should be coming in and saying, well, what can we do for you? What do you need? And so that was the idea, why don't we create a really great system of collecting information from citizens instead of sort of pushing information out to citizens? And I think that's the whole point of democracy in the first place. So that experience really was what sort of took this long, desire of mine to do something in this space to sort of get off my butt and actually do it.
Okay, so Brian, when people receive a question, how are they expected to respond? Is it very binary, yes or no? Or do they get to kind of have a more, I guess, thought out response as far as like fill in the blank? What is the response process like?
Yeah, so you're bringing up a very important part of what I think the strength of Voca is. And that is that not every question is a simple yes or no. There absolutely is nuance, and that is really important. In fact, if we boil everything down to a yes or no, you just sort of end up with a shouting match, and we have enough of those going on already. So the way Voca works is you get a text message with a question. It has a couple sentences of background. It kind of looks like a text message from your mom that's like a little bit too long, but it has a background section, and then it has a statement. And the statement is basically 1 to 5, how much do you agree or support this statement? And then it also has a 1-sentence pro argument. So it says proponents argue that, this is great because, and 1-sentence against argument. So opponents argue that this is bad because. And then sometimes it even has a link to more information. So you can go to the city's website and look at the map or something like that. And then the way you respond is, again, it's a 1 to 5 scale, but you can add a comment. So you can say 5, I bike to work every day and got hit the other week and it was terrifying. And if we're going to try to reduce congestion on our roads, we need to make biking safer. Or you might say 1, I have a disability and I have to park. And it's already hard enough to find parking. And if you take away all the parking to put in bike lanes, I may never be able to go downtown. So these are like the stories that I think are important. And I also think they really help inform policymakers. So people can add comments, but you don't have to. And then what I think is actually a really great feature is that when you get the result, so again, you answer, but hundreds of other people also answer, and you get a link to the results that you can look at on your phone, you can upvote other people's comments. So you can see one person's comment and say, oh, that's great. And you can sort of add a plus to that.
So how much effort do you think that putting something like this took you? I guess you would know since you did it yourself. So not think. How much effort did this take to create?
Well, so I am actually doing this full time now. I left my job about a year and a half ago, and I've been doing this full time ever since. And so I'm a engineer by background and sort of taught myself how to write software in order to do this project. And so, it's been sort of slow and steady, but it's a labor of love. So, I'm pretty excited to be doing it.
So you do it full time now. Is it something that's difficult to maintain? Because I'm sure you have to go in and get these questions and kind of look over what's actually happening in your city council and things like that. and you want to expand this nationwide, and you'd probably need somebody to actually help collect that information nationwide, right?
Absolutely. So right now, I go to all the city council meetings in my city, and I present one of the, at least in California, at all city council meetings, any citizen can come and make a 2 or 3 minute comment. So I will come and present at the beginning of the city council meeting on the last week's question. So give the results to city council. And that also allows me to be aware of, what are the issues that are coming before city council in the next meeting. But you're right. I mean, that's not scalable. There are 10,000 towns and cities in the United States, and I can't be at 10,000 places at once. So I think that the model for Voca is really to find engaged citizens in each city who want to take on that role, who want to go speak on behalf of their neighbors at city council and be the voice for people who have busy lives and can't make it to the city council meeting. But I think that, if you look across the country, there are civic, volunteer, service-oriented groups everywhere. So my hope is that Voca could tap into some of those networks that already exist and, really get some great volunteers in each city that it goes to.
Well, what are you currently doing to tap into those networks?
Well, right now, we are actually just focused in my hometown. And the reason is sometimes it's counterintuitive because people will say, you could have thousands and thousands of users if you went nationwide today. But I think it's more important to actually prove that a large percentage of people want this. And so what we're doing right now is really focusing just on one city to prove that, hey, we can get, we're over 1%, so over 1 out of every 100 people in my town's on Voca, but, let's get to 5%, let's get to 10%. And I think that starts to really shape the narrative. And that also starts to make elected officials stop and listen. Because if 10% of the voters are using this, very simple, but I think powerful, means of communication every week, they're going to start paying attention because they're going to see the next election around the corner and say, I need to do right by these people, and they're keeping track.
So you mentioned that you present you mentioned that you present one question to the city council. Is that the question that was voted on the most in your city? How does that work? Because I know in my city council, they do a lot of things at once. So they bring up a lot of initiatives and, do a lot of votes on said initiatives at once. So is it kind of just how many people vote on that particular issue, or is it something that's particularly more meaningful and impactful? And how do you decide on what's more meaningful and impactful?
Yeah, so, I think cities of different sizes, have probably a different workload. So where I live, the city council meets every 2 weeks. And, it's a city of 80,000 people. It's a suburb of San Francisco. And the city council it's all volunteers, or I think they get a stipend of a couple $100 every month, but they all have regular jobs. But they come in twice a month and, sit for a 3 or 4 hour meeting and take care of the city's business. But in each given meeting, there's usually one kind of hot topic. And so I think of my job as figuring out what that is beforehand so that I can ask about that. There are on occasion sort of 2 big topics in a week, and then I have to choose, but then maybe I'll do one sort of, 2 weeks in advance and one the week of, to try to cover them both. And then lastly, sort of, one thing I think is important is we could simply ask, like, should they vote yes or no? And I think on some issues, that's the best way to ask it. But I think on other issues, a lot of issues, what's more important is sort of to understand which way is the wind blowing? Like, what do citizens generally feel about this? Because the devil's always in the details, and I'm not trying to take that control out of, city managers and people who do this professionally. But I think, and a good example is in California, marijuana is now legal, and each city is having to grapple with, do we want to allow marijuana retail stores in our cities? And if we want them, where should they go? Now, I wouldn't want to ask necessarily the entire population, should it go on, this street corner or that street corner? But I do think that the residents of this city have the right to say, well, do we even want it in the first place? And or what are our concerns about this? So I think that the general directionality is really easy to capture. And then hopefully, my hope is that the city leaders, the elected officials, and the professional city staff, they take that information, they say, okay, people want this, but they don't want it next to schools. And then they are the ones that pull out the maps and figure out the zoning and all the details.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you see any additional benefits for the community other than maybe, I guess, getting them more engaged? Do you think that this could actually have an impact on what the city council ends up deciding? Or I guess in your time period of having done this, have you seen any type of impact?
I absolutely think it has a big impact. So where I live, one of the biggest issues is development. And we have a very high cost of living in the Bay Area, but there's also a concern about traffic, and these are complicated issues that I don't have a silver bullet for, and I don't think anyone else does either. But there was a perception among a lot of residents of where I live that the city council would never say no to any development under any circumstance. That basically they were friends with the developers, and anything developers wanted, they would get. Well, I think that through Voca and through the efforts of other citizen groups, whether or not you are sort of for more development or against it, you've seen a more nuanced approach from city council. You've seen city council coming out on the record and saying, I don't think this development project is right for us. So that's one area where I think that having a regular check-in with the citizens of the city has definitely moved the needle on public policy.
How many people participate in this or actually utilize your platform?
Yeah, so right now we have just shy of 1,000 people signed up. And in any given week, about 50% of the people who are on the platform respond. And so this is actually sets Voca apart from almost any other polling platform, because maybe you send an email poll or call people on the phone, you're going to be lucky to crack 10% response rate. So 50% is really high. And that's another way of getting away from sort of the self-selection bias, which is, if you ask 50,000 people about dog parks, well, maybe only the sliver of people that go to dog parks are going to respond, and then, vice versa about some other issue. But with Voca, it's really this more or less the same people week after week that are responding. And I think that adds credibility to the answer.
Yeah, actually, that's a really high response rate. How long have you had this rolled out and available in your area?
So we've been asking questions for about 1 year. And in that time, we've had quite a lot of growth. So our very first question, we only had 55 people respond to, which to me was still exciting because that's still 55 more people than the city would have heard from otherwise. But now we're routinely getting over 400 people responding to each question. And while that might sound like a huge number, that's really the same sample size that most polling firms, like professional polling firms, would use to sample a city of this size. So we're already starting to reach sort of a statistically significant sample size. But we're not slowing down. We're growing, quickly, week after week. We're getting bigger.
What's your current funding?
So right now, Voca is self-funded. But over time, my hope is that we grow, and eventually that will mean we need outside funding. And that will either come from, we might become a nonprofit and look for, foundation support or donations from individuals, sort of a public radio model, maybe. Or, I think there are also paths where we could raise money from cities that want sort of the detailed, sort of the data behind the data, or, a deeper insight into what citizens want. They, as it is, spend tens of thousands of dollars I mean, even in a smaller city like where I live, they spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on consultants. So there's, I think, an opportunity to bring them a lot of value at a discount, and in so doing, pay our bills.
Well, so so I could see that perspective. I would just be a little concerned if they would try to influence people's opinions, as in present them kind of a very easy question of the week that they're really not that concerned about. Like they kind of already know what their voters want on that question,
Mm-hmm.
and then bypass something that's a little bit more important.
I think that's,
they happen to get their hands on it.
yeah, no.
Is that
So
kind of a concern that I have, or is that not a
no, I think
possibility?
I think you are hitting the nail on the head. Actually, I think that's a really important concern. Some people have said, you could package this sort of and sell it to cities as just a tool. And I've argued, well, I don't, kind of what you're saying, I don't think that would be very helpful, because no city is going to ask the hard question that makes them look bad. Just like you wouldn't necessarily want your hometown newspaper to be run by City Hall, because they'd never write a critical article. So I believe that Voca needs to be editorially independent of the city. But even with that being said, I think that the city may want the insight that is gathered from Voca, and be willing to pay for that, even if they don't get to control the questions themselves.
What additional insight is gathered other than you input a zip code and then you get a question? What other information would you be able to provide them?
Sure. So I think one thing that is neat about Voca is that because it's basically the same group of people answering week after week, you can start to correlate different issues with each other in ways that maybe traditional polls wouldn't be able to do. So, for instance, if retail marijuana stores and bike lanes are both big issues where I live, Voca would be able to show a correlation perhaps between people that want bike lanes and also want retail marijuana. And you could start to give sort of a full picture of the voter, or for instance, how different sort of preferences line up or correlate with each other. And I think that gives a much more sort of rich tapestry of the community in a way that sort of a one-off question doesn't give.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there wouldn't be kind of well, I know that this is kind of projecting ahead on kind of the capacities or the capabilities this platform could have. Is this kind of something that you would give, and this is hypothetical, you would give the data over to them and then they could run the analysis themselves, or would you do something in-house and then provide them the answers or the results of the analysis?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing to me is that, Voca is completely built on trust. And so when people sign up, when they answer questions, there's a trust being built there between Voca and Voca users that it's the same sort of issues that other tech companies, I think, have sort of run afoul of, which is, they kind of, the Cambridge Analytica thing, sort of Facebook giving your data away to some third-party firm. They don't really know what they're doing with it. So I would be really, wary about the first option that you're suggesting, which is sort of give the data over to the city and let them do what they want with it. I think, helping the city understand its own residents' preferences, but bringing them sort of the answer, not the raw data. To me, that's much more in keeping with the whole vision of what Voca is. And I don't see that as a violation of anyone's trust, that, when the whole reason you're participating in Voca is hopefully because you want the city to understand what you think better and do right by you more often than not. So, in so much as you're delivering on that promise, I think there's a lot of potential. I also think that it's something we're going to have to be careful about, to not, to never break that sort of contract with people, because other tech companies have, and it's something we got to be aware of.
That makes sense. So because when I went on to the Voca.votes, I got the thing about inputting my zip code, but I didn't get like a service agreement or anything along those lines. I don't know if it was just because it's not available in my zip code. Is that something that you are doing in your city?
So we have a privacy policy, but we don't necessarily have, I haven't paid for lawyers to write us some 15-page service agreement. But we have a privacy policy that we're, very happy to, well, we want everyone to look over, and we, if people have questions, we're happy to discuss that. But the gist of it is that Voca is never going to allow you to be individually identified. It's just like voting. When you vote in an election, you believe that your vote is anonymous. And I think that Voca has to be the exact same way. In fact, I so strongly believe that I would never do anything to call that into question. So, the Voca does ask for demographic information when you sign up, and you can opt out of those questions. But that demographic information helps all of us together show that we represent the entire community. That it's not just, all people of a certain, race, ethnicity, income, gender, neighborhood, all sort of pretending to be the entire city, that it's actually the entire city pretending to be the entire city.
So this is just a curiosity question of my own that actually isn't necessarily tied with with this, but sure. What is the value of providing demographic information?
Yeah, so again, when people don't like what they're told, they generally attack the messenger. And if Voca is the messenger, for instance, if you do a poll and it finds that, like for instance, this week we just asked people to rate the police in the city I live in. Now, that might sound simple, but let's be honest. If we'd been rating polices in all the different cities across the country, maybe things would be different in our country. I think there's some wonderful police forces, but there's obviously some that have a lot of work to do. Well, in my city, people are generally speaking, very happy with the police. But let's say they weren't. I think the natural thing the police department or the mayor would say is, well, who are these people? And they don't represent the city. So they would essentially attack the messenger. They would attack the method. And with demographic information, you can say, well, according to the census, my city is, 50% white and 30% Latino and 10% Asian. And, the average age is 35 years old. And the average income is $70,000. Then you can show the sample that Voca has and say, okay, so Voca's average income is $80,000 and, it's 60% white people instead of 50, but it's pretty close. So sort of it's from all these different neighborhoods within the city. So in other words, it's a pretty representative sample. What are the chances that we are wildly all just a bunch of people that sort of hate this particular issue? Unlikely. But without that demographic information, it's much easier for them to just dismiss it and say, well, it's just those people.
So I can completely see the value of, I guess, kind of keeping this to one question or one item, because a rating technically isn't a question if you go rate the police. But I can also see its complication. For instance, rating of something like rate the police, well, that's a multitude of things that you can assume there with the rating. You could say, okay, am I talking about police accountability? Am I talking about how courteous our interactions have been in the past? What is the way that you've been able to, I guess, get any data of value based off of something so broad?
Yeah, so I think that Voca has to be the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it. So if you find out that 80% of people in your city have a negative opinion of the police, that should start a conversation. I mean, people should stop what they're doing and want to talk about that and unpack that. And with Voca, I also mentioned you can leave a comment, and a lot of people do. A really high percentage. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what it is, but pages and pages of comments are left on Voca. And also people can upvote each other's comments. So what you start to see are trends in the comments. And something maybe less controversial than police, going back to the example of bike lanes. What you'll see is the number one concern people have about bike lanes is the loss of parking. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons you don't like bike lanes. Maybe you just think that cyclists are annoying, or you're nervous when you drive around them. But what the comments show is that the main reason people are against bike lanes, who are against it, is because they're worried about parking. And similarly, the main reason people are for bike lanes is because they think that it will reduce traffic. So that's where I think you can hit that nuance. But again, I don't think that Voca should be the end of a conversation. My hope is that it's the beginning of a conversation.
So let's say that people get a question in which the city council will be voting upon in a couple weeks or a month. And is there any follow-up to the people that are using your platform, as in the city council decided against this initiative or for this initiative? Is there something like that?
Yeah, so that's actually, I should have explained that at the beginning. So thank you for asking.
I just may have forgotten.
No, I don't think I got to that part. But at the end of the week, so there's again sort of a weekly cycle, and at the end of the week, a summary is sent out. So, and that's a much shorter text message, but it basically says, how many people are for it, how many people are against it, and then sort of in that case, it would be, city council voted on it, or this was presented last night at city council, and after discussion, they approved the measure by a vote of 5-2. So you get that sort of complete, sort of what happened next.
Okay, that's good, because that kind of like ties up from question to result. So that's good to have. Okay, so in the little bit amount of time that we have left, kind of give me just what sets your platform apart from other tools, and even maybe even on if somebody wanted to maybe get some insight into their voters, what would set this platform apart from other, I guess, consulting agencies as well?
Yeah, so first off, I think there are a bunch of really exciting platforms out there. I'm energized by this sort of new desire for civic participation that we're seeing across the country. Voca is part of it, but there are hundreds of other groups and organizations doing exciting things. So I don't think we have any monopoly on exciting new civically oriented tech. With that said, I think the difference between Voca and some other platforms that I'm aware of is that we are laser focused on local government. I think that there's lots of improvement that can happen at the state and certainly with Congress or at the national level. But as I said at the beginning, local governments who paves your roads and picks up your trash and educates your kids, and there are a lot of really important issues at the local level. But I think a lot of there are fewer platforms that are trying to sort of solve that problem of connecting you with City Hall, not necessarily Congress. And so I think that's probably the main difference. But again, I think people should use sort of all of the above, because I'm just excited about people being involved.
So if you're currently in the San Francisco Bay Area, Brian is currently looking for volunteers. So how can they get in contact with you, Brian?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is just to go to voca.vote, and you'll see a contact link in the menu, or you can always email me at brian with an I at voca.vote.
Absolutely. So Brian, thank you so much for being with us today. I really did enjoy talking with you and learning more about your platform, Voca Votes. If you want more information, please go to voca.votes.com. and you can input your zip code, and hopefully you will see it expanding to a local area near you. Currently, it's only available in Redwood City of California. Brian, thank you so much again for being with us.
Thank you. And actually, could I just add that the website's actually voca.vote. There's no .com at the end.
Okay.
You just listened to another episode of Chat, Communications, Happenings, and Trends. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Also, head on over to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/ActifyChat and help us bring more content to you by supporting us. Thank you, and keep fighting the good fight, my friends.